to shout. Welcome back. Thank you for coming to my talk. I always wanted to say that. I'm going to be talking about Lightning usability. I hope you've all have a Lightning wallet. I hope you all had the chance already to make some Lightning payments. And I'm pretty sure that as part of that long journey of getting into your first Lightning payment, receiving your first payment, making your first payment, you have run into some tiny hiccups. And generally, the Lightning Network is a great improvement over Bitcoin. And I think it's a great improvement over the kind of legacy financial systems that we have. But it comes with its own unique difficulties. It comes with its own unique characteristics that make it special, that make it work, but also that can make it rather difficult to understand or difficult to use. And maybe a bit connecting to Andrew's talk about the Tesla's problem, right? We do have this this complexity in the Lightning Network, and some of it might be possible to reduce, but generally there's always going to be some complexity in these kind of systems. And we can of course abstract these complexities away from the user into the apps, but that causes its own problems, that causes its own difficulties. And this talk is going to give you a little bit of an overview over what I believe these difficulties are, what they look like today, how they're being solved today, and how they can potentially be solved in the future. So I'm going to be talking specifically about these 5 points. So the first one is invoices. The Lightning Network uses invoices rather than addresses, for example. The second one is channels and their capacity and inbound and outbound. Then there's pathfinding. How do you find your recipient? How do you find where the money is going? Fourth is that we still in this network, even if we want to ideally transact always off-chain, always on the Lightning Network, we still have to worry a little bit, or as developer of applications, we still have to worry a little bit about how to deal with the underlying on-chain Bitcoin transactions and how they confirm and how they pay fees. And the last one is the branding and how we communicate this to stores and to our users, and how do we communicate this to applications that want to integrate Lightning. So first of all, invoices. And invoices, they might at first seem like an unnecessary evil that has been introduced to kind of make life very difficult for us. But in general, I think it's very much worth pointing out that they're a huge improvement over existing systems, including Bitcoin, including bank wires, including how we deal with even credit cards, because they allow us to define payments. They allow us to specify certain variables that are very important in daily commerce. So invoices are characterized by having a fixed amount. That makes it possible for us to reject payments that are being overpaid or underpaid, which used to be a huge hassle in Bitcoin payments, where you would have people paying Bitcoin transactions using wallets that would deduct the fee from the amount, or accidentally sending too much. That causes headaches for the merchant, that causes headaches for the payment processors, and Lightning solves that quite elegantly by allowing you to reject a payment that is overpaid or underpaid. Lightning invoices are always denominated in Bitcoin. That can be a difficulty if you're charging in fiat currency. That can also be really great, especially for kind of defining how much exactly you want to get paid. Lightning invoices expire. Again, that's something that you might have experienced in your Lightning journey as something that's inconvenient. If somebody wants to send you some sats and you create your invoice, but you're not sending that fast enough, and suddenly the invoice has expired, you need to create a new one. But that's very important for merchants, especially who use flexible currency conversions, because they need to be able to give a quote that is limited in time. They need to be able to tell you in advance that you only have 15 minutes to pay that invoice, and then later they need to have they need to be able to reject that payment based on this expiration date. For example, because their invoice is no longer valid, they no longer want to sell you that product at this Satoshi price 15 minutes in the future. Invoices can also only be used once. That might also appear to be very inconvenient because you want to maybe print out your QR code and post it on your merchant storefront. You might want to hand out invoices as part of your profile and social media, but invoices can only be used once. That's a security limitation, but that's also a practical limitation in commerce, where you want to make sure whether an invoice is paid, and where an invoice, if you prove an invoice is paid, this invoice ideally is unique to you, and only you could have paid that invoice because it was only issued to you. That's much more difficult to do with things like on-chain Bitcoin addresses. Now, how do we solve this? How do existing businesses solve this? How do existing applications solve this? And how do they kind of create abstractions on top of invoices that allow us to be a bit more flexible and maybe get rid of the fixed amount, create addresses that are suitable for donations, or create addresses that are not denominated in Bitcoin? And there are a couple of options out there, and there are a couple of approaches out there. These are the most common ones. I've kind of listed them in the way in which they appeared, not necessarily in an order in which they make the most sense or the most popular, but Keysend might be before Lightningcon. But the first idea was maybe we can just create an invoice that has a 0 Satoshi amount. That in the beginning was not very secure, because the recipient, without knowing how many Satoshis to expect, isn't able to verify whether all the Satoshis really arrived. So somebody in between along the route might, in this case, have the ability to take away a portion of these funds. That is a lot safer to use now. It's still not an ideal case, which is why you might see some wallets creating 0 Satoshi amount invoices by default, and other wallets not being able to pay it, which is already a very lively example of an unsolved usability problem. The Lightningcon is maybe the most popular way to solve a lot of these issues. It's very flexible because it is just an URL endpoint. An LN-URL is really just a URL. It's an endpoint that your wallet calls to say, what is this? I found this QR code in the wild at a merchant from a friend at in a little red envelope that you might have seen outside, and it asks the website, what is this? What am I presented here with? And the website responds with some data. It most commonly responds with, this is a pay code, I expect you to pay me, or it responds me, I have something for you. It might even do things that are not directly related to Lightning payments, such as you can use me to sign up for something. But that now requires you to run a website. It now requires you to run a web server. So we're again relying on the DNS system. We're again relying on domain names. We're again relying on a server somewhere that's publicly reachable, and that might not be within the scope of what we expect users who use a Lightning wallet or a Lightning node to be able to do. This also hugely increases the barrier of using the Lightning network in this way. So now, if I want to hand out a usable Lightningcon Pay, then I now need to run a server, and as a result, we see that most people who do want to make use of these tools, for example with Lightning addresses, are relying on centralized services. They're relying on custodial services, which again creates a drawback from a usability problem that we solved, and another potential usability problem that we created because people don't have the unique access to their funds. But the custom logic is really remarkable in what you can do, and all the potential ideas aren't even fully developed yet, and there is definitely going to be a place for these kind of solutions, simply because of how popular, flexible, and easy they are. We also want to make it easy for people to just build on top of Lightning, to get started very quickly, to make use of services rather than only relying on a pure peer-to-peer network. KeySend is fascinating because it does have significant usage. It's also been around for a long time, and it kind of tries to reintroduce the experience of a Bitcoin address into your Lightning experience, where you can share only your public key, only the public key of your node, and say, this is me, this is my node, feel free to send me money. And using KeySend, and AMP is quite an interesting evolution of that. You're able to just donate money to any address. You can attach messages to it. You can make these message payments repeatedly. There isn't necessarily a knowledge from the recipient of who made that payment, but they're commonly used for donations, or they're used for streaming sats, and they are relatively widely supported, and you don't need to run additional software to make use of them. You only need to enable this functionality in your Lightning node, no matter what implementation it is, and you're ready to accept these payments. No need to open your ports in your router, no need to disable Tor, no need to buy a domain name or figure out how to run a web server. Finally, there's Bolt 12, which is an evolution of and a new proposal of a changed invoice format, which also wants to enable a lot of these functionalities that Neutronpay brings, with the difference that the communication is done directly between Lightning nodes rather than between a server and a Lightning node. So allowing you to share an invoice that allows the end user to receive payments rather than send payments, for example. The next difficulty that we encounter, and maybe also the most difficult part to solve, are channels. And with channels come capacity issues, and with capacity issues come complicated terms such as inbound and outbound, and suddenly you have to explain the entire financial concept of what liquidity is just to let somebody use a Lightning wallet. By default, a channel is a very counterintuitive concept. Why are you limited in the amount of Satoshis you're able to receive or able to send? Why does it matter who that channel is with? Why can the capacity of a channel not be increased? Why do you have to wait to create such a channel, and how long do you have to wait, and why does this time vary? What's a channel reserve, and why can I not spend the entire amount in a channel to the other party, and why do I always have to keep a little bit of Satoshis in there? How do I select my channel partners? That's a relatively difficult question to answer too. If you have somebody who just starts a node, then maybe it's relatively intuitive that they have to deposit some Bitcoin first before they want to spend it, and maybe next they need to deposit these Bitcoin from their node into the Lightning network and kind of make sats out of Bitcoin, but who do they open that channel with, and how do they find that peer? Who's going to recommend that peer? What does that mean for decentralization if we have a list of the top peers and everybody kind of gravitates to the very top and we all end up connecting to the exact same counterparty? And finally, what happens with that channel down the road? How do we take these funds in our channel and maybe put them into long-term storage, or maybe deposit them on an exchange that doesn't support Lightning payments? And why can our channels suddenly disappear? Why would our channels suddenly go offline, not be available anymore, and under what circumstances are they being closed? These are all difficulties that we either have to explain to people, and maybe it's if you are running a service or running a routing node, then I think it's perfectly legitimate that you can be expected to understand these things. But as somebody who wants to just make payments and receive payments and maybe zap some people on Nostr or buy a coffee down the road or top up their mobile phone, these are maybe not questions that we expect to be able to understand. So let's look a little bit about how businesses or how services are abstracting on these ideas. Here again, I'm trying to order this a little bit by evolution. How did these ideas evolve, or how did people approach these ideas? Rings of Fire is very popular for beginners of Lightning nodes, people who start their nodes, who are faced with that question of who do I open a channel with? How do I get that ability to both send and receive? And the easy answer is simply they are in a chat group with each other. They're already discussing these issues. So why not open a channel? So in an idea that you have a group of people, they're sitting in a circle, and everybody opens a channel with the person to their right. And now, at the end, everybody has two channels. Everybody has the ability to receive and the ability to send. But that means that you now have two channels in a group of people who all have a new node. They all just started using the Lightning Network for the first time, and that might not necessarily give you the ability to make payments to the broader network. That might not necessarily help your ability to successfully make a lot of payments. So then the next thing is you might advertise yourself, or you might look for advertisements of nodes who you are allowed to, who let you connect to them, or who you want to connect to you. So you might have an easy messaging board that says, here, this is my node, this is my service, I require inbound, and maybe you will open a channel to me purely because you expect profit from this, or maybe you open a channel to me because I promise you payment. From this, we can imagine that now dedicated companies would provide these services. They can create a website, and there are a couple of sites that do this, where you can buy a channel, where you can simply pay a Lightning invoice and enter your public key, and the service will then open a channel to you. And this can be done in an automated way, and this is something that's used in a lot of the non-custodial mobile wallets today, where the process of somebody else opening a channel to you is automated, and there isn't much user interaction anymore between how that channel is opened and how that channel is paid for. But of course, the channel now has fixed terms. There is a fixed counterparty. You have no choice in who opens that channel to you. So if you download a mobile wallet for the first time and you receive your first Lightning payment, then that wallet is likely going to deduct an amount from that first payment and is going to open a channel to you from their node. You have no choice in who opens that channel to you, but with a very high likely probability, that channel is going to be very well connected, because it's connected to all the other users of that mobile wallet, and it probably has a big brand attached to it that allows it to easily convince many other end users and businesses to open channels to them, while also hopefully, and that's a big limitation, needing to be highly liquid and very well funded. So if you look at these very large nodes, then it's not enough that everybody opens a channel to them because they're famous and they expect profit, but there also need to be Bitcoin inside of that node, and those Bitcoin need to come from somewhere. So somebody needs to either have a lot of Bitcoin, which also is a big problem if we now admit that running a popular Lightning wallet requires a huge capital cost in Bitcoin that you need to lock up in your channel. The evolution of that, and this is where then marketplaces come in, is not so much to have a single entity open that channel to you on demand, but rather have a whole pool, in a literal sense, of potential counterparties who who you can ask to open a channel for you. And in this case, an ask means you're willing to pay for this, and having a group of counterparties, potential counterparties, allows them to compete on price and on availability and on other metrics. By extension, these channels don't necessarily have to be opened by yourself, but they can be purchased by third parties, where now you no longer have, you would still download your mobile wallet, and that you still receive your first channel upon your first payment, but it's no longer from a single popular node, but instead the mobile wallet that you're using purchases that channel from a marketplace, which helps a lot with decentralization, because you no longer have a single popular node that can be attacked, that can be DDoS, that can be shut down, but rather everybody has a channel with somebody else. And you might have two channels from two different counterparties. Hopefully, yeah, leading to a much more robust network, but maybe also a less consistent user experience. The Lightning Network, you can imagine that as a large map. And in that map, you have corners. You might think of them as cities, and these cities are Lightning nodes. To get from you to your destination, you likely have to either build a direct path to that destination, meaning opening a channel, or you have to find existing routes, existing roads through other cities that are going to charge you a toll to get to your final destination. And to be able to find that path, you need to plan that route. You need to chart your trip. That requires you to know where all these channels are, where all these roads are. That requires you to know how high these tolls are, and you will have, and eventually you have to then decide on what is the fastest, shortest, or cheapest route. And in the Lightning Network, that is done by the sender. The sender decides the path. That allows the sender to know in advance exactly what fees they're likely to pay, but that also means the sender needs to try a couple of roads, because they don't know whether these roads are busy, or whether these roads are even maintained, or whether these roads are even open. And that costs a lot of computational power. So if you are using a non-custodial mobile wallet, depending on how it's being set up, then you might notice that your phone takes a while to find that path. It makes a lot of attempts. That is computationally expensive. That costs battery power, and that is, yeah, also contributing. And failed payments are contributing to a poor user experience in Lightning. This is something that a large node that makes a lot of payments, for example, because it is run by a custodial service, is a lot better at, because it tries all these roads more frequently on behalf of more users, and is able to, yeah, more accurately predict whether a certain path succeeds or not. But with a larger network, with more nodes in the network, and more channels, we now have more and more difficulty to really find a functional path. We might, in that case, see, yeah, also some kind of centralizing effects, where maybe then custodial wallets become more attractive because they're more visible in the network because they're larger nodes, but also they make more payments, and so they're able to kind of chart these routes more successfully. So one idea for this is to, instead of deciding the path yourself, you're kind of just handing a destination ticket to a more popular or a more experienced routing node, and ask them, please find the destination for me, kind of how you would use a GPS in your car, instead of physical paper map on which you plan the route yourself. That has some privacy implications, but that has huge performance improvements without giving up the custody of your funds. There are also big improvements to be made if you're running the latest LND. You're likely to find out that there is a new pathfinding algorithm available, and if you try it out, then you will likely find that your payment success rate actually increases because there are more variables taken into account into how exactly you find that route. But that's not always something that's not always something that is very easy to research on as the network constantly evolves, and as also the sophistication of the network members, of the network nodes, constantly changes and increases. And hopefully nodes themselves are able to manage their channel liquidity better in a way that other people's routing activity is more likely to succeed. There are also some smaller tricks that might make this pathfinding more successful, such as creating channels that are not backed by Bitcoin on chain, but rather for example, two nodes that have some kind of contractual relationship with each other, or even are controlled by the same entity, might have these virtual channels between them through which you can still route, but for which you don't have to pay fees, or which don't have to be backed by actual Bitcoin. If you're using a Lightning wallet, then personally, I believe ideally you never have to worry about on-chain transactions. Ideally, when you are receiving a Lightning payment for the first time, somebody else will open a channel to you, maybe a marketplace or maybe a centralized counterparty, but ideally you will not have to deposit Bitcoin on your wallet, worry about the on-chain fees, figure out who your channel partner is going to be. But you might very well end up in a situation where your channel has to be closed for whatever reason. There might be a rare error in which the channel has to be force closed, or your channel is inactive for a long time and your counterparty wants to get their funds back, and you end up with a small amount of Bitcoin in your wallet. And that's also something that is relatively difficult to deal with, because you're now presenting a user of the Lightning Network with something that is unknown, with something that is unfamiliar, such as Bitcoin on the blockchain. And now you do have to communicate to them that there are going to be on-chain fees to be paid, and there are going to be confirmations to be waited for, and then where do these Bitcoin go? Maybe they go back into a new wallet, into a new channel, but that also requires quite some abstraction. So the ability to exchange, to exchange funds in a Lightning Network into funds on the Bitcoin blockchain also needs to be facilitated. So we also tend to make it, even though they are the same currency and they are the same thing, we tend to verbally differentiate already in that we call one thing Bitcoin and we denominate them in decimal places, and we call the other thing Satoshis, and they have lots of zeros in the end, because we kind of do want to communicate that there might be a difference in how we experience Bitcoin versus how we experience Satoshi. And we might still have to communicate that there is a good reason to hold on-chain Bitcoin. You might not want to store funds that you keep for your children, or that you want to store away for your retirement in a Lightning wallet. And now, what if you earn Bitcoin through the Lightning Network on a day-to-day basis? What is the best way to now convert or transfer those into your hardware wallet, into your cold storage? And the solution that is typically proposed is that of a submarine swap, which allows you to non-custodially send a Lightning payment to a node that is willing to send you an equivalent on-chain payment to your hardware wallet or cold storage wallet. So those payments are enforced by the same security that make a Lightning payment through the network either confirm or complete in its entirety or fail in its entirety. So we call them hash time-locked contracts. Again, those have to be abstracted away in a way that the user doesn't have to trust a counterparty with their funds, but still intuitively understands what to do in case such a swap goes wrong, which can theoretically happen for a number of reasons. The Lightning Network is evolving into a multi-currency network that has massive positive implications for its network effects that allow a lot of people to take part in it who do not want to hold Bitcoin or who currently don't own Bitcoin, but who do want to take part in this global economy in which they can immediately at low cost send funds forth and back. And there are numerous amounts of solutions. So maybe the first one I should mention is maybe you look at Neutronpay, right? Neutronpay allows you to receive Satoshis into your wallet, but they're being converted and they're being displayed to you in your local currency, may it be Vietnamese dong or Canadian dollars, from where you can then either spend them again through the Lightning Network or deposit them into your bank account. These solutions are emerging throughout the world. They are very popular. They do solve these issues, but they're not going to be available in every part of the world. They're not going to be available for everyone. For example, if you don't have a bank account, or if you are in a place where bank accounts are not very common or very expensive or come with their own difficulties. Stable coins are, you could think of them as a type of bank balance, with the difference that this is not a regulated bank in your home jurisdiction, but a better or worse regulated deposit-taking institution far away from you. That's great if that's legal in your country. That's great if that's legal in the country where the stablecoin is located, and it kind of allows you to keep a foreign bank balance that you can ideally very soon deposit directly into or hold directly in your Lightning wallet rather than having to exchange and to sats or spend on the Tron blockchain. Stable sats are an idea that you can also find Arvin around here somewhere, that do not create a liability backed by cash somewhere, but rather tokenize a derivative that holds a trading position on some exchange somewhere that has the equivalent value of, for example, $1 or a dong. This whole range of how to connect the existing fiat rail system to the Lightning Network is something where you can see a lot of solutions attempting a variety of solutions, none of which have yet really been proven in the market, and where you can see also a lot of movement in how they're evolving, from payment processors to personal wallets to more traditional financial institutions such as neobanks, giving you the idea that maybe soon you will be able to deposit sats directly into your bank account. Finally, and this is my final thought, Bitcoin has a very high brand awareness. Paying with Bitcoin has been getting coverage in media for a very long time. There have been meetups and businesses built around that idea, but it's something that people don't seem to want to use. There aren't a lot of people who are actively trying to pay with Bitcoin or getting paid with Bitcoin. And this is also true for businesses who very rarely advertise themselves as we accept Bitcoin. And maybe logically, it is also completely unheard of that a business advertises that they accept US dollar or that they accept Vietnamese dong. It is not very typical for businesses to publicize their currency preference, because once we pay, we kind of no longer care what the other side does with their money. We no longer care if they buy gold with it or pay their suppliers or their employees. What we do care about is how we pay. So we see businesses advertising themselves as we take cash. They don't necessarily say we take US dollars, they say we take cash. They might say we take credit cards, or they say we take only debit cards, or they say you can pay us with check, you can pay us with this and this app. And I think similarly, maybe Lightning is developing in a similar direction, where people are saying I want to pay with Lightning rather than I want to pay with Bitcoin. Or businesses are saying we accepting Lightning payments, because it matches more the experience and it matches more the intent of these two commercial partners. Where I might use a Lightning wallet, I might use Neutronpay, but I have dong in that Neutronpay wallet. And when I go to the store and I want to pay with it, then it's not very meaningful for me to ask, do you take dong or do you take Neutronpay? Because I might be in a country where Neutronpay is not available and people don't know what the Vietnamese dong is. And on the other side too, if you are, the business might not want to accept Bitcoin or hold Bitcoin, but they might want to accept Lightning payments because they have a provider that helps them convert whatever it is that comes through into the currency or into the payment tool that helps them achieve their goals. And that is my final thought. And I do believe we have time for some questions, but you can also always find me. I'll be around for the next few days, and I'm always happy to talk to you about Lightning usability difficulties and how we can improve building on top of them and how we can improve communicating those difficulties.
All right, Q&A time. We have about 7 minutes, so we have some time for some questions, right? So we've caught back up. Hands up in the crowd. What do we got here? Leo spat a lot of knowledge on everybody, so I'm sure some people have some questions. Don't be shy. Here we go. We got one from the front row.
Hey, Leo. Thanks for a really great talk. I actually have two questions. The first one was about invoices. So I'm not really familiar with the history. So you talked about how invoices are designed so they solve a lot of merchant problems. So the problem where merchants don't get the exact amount of money they wanted, the exchange rate expires, etc. How much of those are tied to the underlying function of the Lightning protocol, and how much of those were sort of like people just looking at like the problems that Bitcoin payment had and trying to solve those? And like, is it possible to separate the two? Like, is it possible to have a lower level Lightning payment thing where you don't have to deal with those sort of things? And the second question is about paying with Lightning and multi-currency. So you described, like, in the instance you just described, like, would it be possible, is it possible in all those situations to always pay with Bitcoin? Or are there situations where, like, maybe the merchant accepts Lightning and they want dong, but they don't, and I only have sats in my wallet, but I can't pay? Thank you very much.
So regarding the first question, Lightning invoices were designed with the intent to make Bitcoin payments function in the Lightning network. So they're not so much created with this idea of like a merchant payment, but my point was they do solve those problems. So they do maybe coincidentally, most likely for better than for worse, solve a lot of the problems that we've seen with Bitcoin payments. But they're not something that we can easily remove. So by default, a Lightning payment needs to have an amount and an expiration that has technical reasons. But we can create alternative forms of Lightning invoices or things that look like Lightning invoices that do solve these problems for us. For example, an AMP invoice by default only needs to include the pub key of the recipient. That might not always be a solution because the recipient might not have a unique pub key, for example. But in cases where you do run your own node and you do have your own unique pub key, you would be able to create such an invoice that really only signals I am an AMP invoice and here's my pub key. And now anybody can send you safely funds to this pub key, and you're not really able to see who sent you these funds or what they're related to, but you do know what amount you're supposed to expect, and then you can expect this payment. And now, once we have this AMP invoice, we can then selectively add things again. So we can add an amount and say anybody can now pay me, but it has to be exactly 1,000 sats. Very useful, for example, for a vending machine, right? You have each item might have its own invoice. The vending machine doesn't need a web server. As long as the wallets of the customers support this, they're able to pay exactly 1,000 sats. And now the receiving node doesn't necessarily know who paid or doesn't expect that payment, but is able to understand this payment is related to this invoice, and this invoice is related to this product, so I release it. The second problem, for the Lightning Network to become a multi-currency network, it has to be a single network. It has to be, these invoices have to be compatible with each other. And in the same way that you wouldn't necessarily know whether the Neutronpay invoice that you received or whether the Strike invoice or the Cash App invoice you received, what kind of currency lies behind it, or what the intentions are of the user receiving it. You would see a Lightning invoice, your wallet would understand the Lightning invoice, and that limitation that the Lightning invoice is denominated in Satoshi is then unlikely to be removed, or is changed in the way that your wallet would still have to, would still understand this, right? So any kind of change that is made to this risks pushing older wallets off the network, for example, which might be suitable, might not be suitable, but the eventual goal has to be that we have a Lightning network, and you can expect somebody who advertises that they receive payments over the Lightning network to receive your payment that is a Lightning wallet. And if you're using Strike or if you're using a Satoshi denominated wallet, that needs to function. Yes, please.
To the lady in the middle of the room.
I know you talked a bit about LNURL, but given the growth of Nostr and the adoption of the protocol, we've seen an explosion of people using Lightning address. And there's a human readable component to that, and I know there are a lot of trade-offs and pros and cons, so I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I would be really curious to hear your take on the growth of Lightning address and the UX benefits and trade-offs as well.
A Lightning address is a form of an LNURL pay, which is a specially decoded web endpoint. So your Lightning address, Leo at Hong Kong, it points to a specific site, Hong Kong /well-known /LNURPay/Leo. So it's a way for your wallet to find the endpoint and negotiate how to make that payment. And that has been hugely successful with donations especially, but also with individual payments that are made to, for example, recurring payments that you make to your friend. The big downside of these Lightning addresses is that you need your own domain, or you trust somebody else with their domain, and that somebody else or you need to now run a web server. And at the moment, I think the tools are not quite there to make it very easy for people to run their own Lightning addresses on their own nodes in a non-custodial way. But I'm also not convinced that it's very important to have these, as important, for example, for your personal cold storage. I think it's incredibly important that you keep your own Bitcoin. But for something like a Lightning address, where the funds can just flow through, it's a trade-off, such a disusability trade-off might very well be acceptable, because you're not necessarily storing your funds in your Lightning address. I don't think people who use Nostr are really doing that, but they're using that service to conveniently receive those payments and publicize those donations, these zaps, in a way that others can easily see that they have been made, and at the end of the day, they probably or hopefully withdraw them to their personal wallet. So what I would like to see is a way for custodial services to go a step towards their users and make it easy for them to turn these valuable added services into non-custodial Satoshis. So for example, automatically send them via AMP to your node whenever they're received, or giving you the functionality to, whenever you open the app, withdraw them from your custodial wallet into your non-custodial wallet.
Awesome. So I guess that's it. I guess we can probably wrap this session up. But to your point, Leo, that you said earlier in terms of like onboarding merchants, I can speak on behalf of Neutronpay, where, yeah, whether we're speaking to an SMB or an enterprise customer, definitely paying over Lightning, whether that's fiat over Lightning or Satoshis over Lightning, that seems to go over much better and add less friction and confusion about, you know, paying with Bitcoin. So definitely, so if you see any of our stickers when we're having them in our merchant stores, it's definitely pay with Lightning, because really that's the payment rail, and they don't need to, so putting Bitcoin on there just adds, we don't need more friction when we're onboarding merchants. So paying over Lightning, just like if you're saying, we accept Visa here, we accept WePay or WeChat or what, Alipay or Lightning, so we feel like that's the best method as well. And we actually had a question from Twitter come in, and they're asking what the equation on your t-shirt was.
This is the sum of all the blocks multiplied with the amount of Bitcoin created in them. So if you solve this, you get to 21 million.
Awesome. I'm sure they'll know the answer now. Thank you very much.